So let's just do some introductions. Welcome to all of you from wherever you are joining us from and whatever time of day it is. If you haven't come across me before, my name's Lucinda. I've got background in corporate learning and development. I'm a chartered psychologist. I'm founder and CEO of Actus, which I'll mention in a moment. We offer performance, talent and learning in terms of software, but also we do training and development, and I personally do consultancy and various other various other topics. I have a lot of interest in change. So I wrote a book called How to Be a Change Superhero. And when I'm not doing webinars or consultancy or training, then I like to play netball or tennis. So Actus, if you're not aware of it, we focus on performance management, talent management and learning management. We also have compliance functionality if you're in financial services. If you're in more of an L&D role, I know some of you, I've worked with you on this, we also have a 360 functionality, which is brilliant if you're looking to develop leaders, those sort of tools, and can be used for a range of aspects. So that's the space that we're in. It's very much OD, performance space. And of course, objective setting is core to that, which is one of the reasons we thought that our audience might find thinking about what creates good quality objectives something that's of use. So I'm going to talk about what are the characteristics of high performance objectives. I mean, objectives have been around for a long time, so I am going to open up the conversation, see if we've got anything fresh. I'm going to link onto something called the Balanced Scorecard that when I was in the workplace, and actually there's someone on here who I used to work with, we used to use something called the Balanced Scorecard. So I'm going to share how you could consider that as a business tool if it's something of interest to you. And just the links to how do we make objectives work or not work, if you like, and what to watch out for. And I know many of the people here are in HR roles. If you're not in an HR role or you're in OD or LD, just let us know in the chat. I'd be keen to know, particularly if this is your first time you've come on one of my webinars. I'm interested, have you come in here with the line manager hat on, or what interested you about this topic? Because as I said, this is something that we often run training on objective setting, but in terms of a webinar, it's interesting to know what the audience is, and so I can try and pitch it as relevant as possible. So don't be shy, do feel free to use the chat. I'll just keep an eye on it as you use that. And also, if you've got any questions or comments as we're going through, feel free to comment as well. So first of all, let's just throw this out here. There's actually loads of books, there's loads of content out there, and you might have come across some of these. So there's this thing called a big, hairy, audacious goal, which was a very popular, it came out in a recent book, and actually it came out in my head which book it was that we came from. Someone tell me if you're familiar with it. I had it, that's in my tongue where I think it came from, but it's one of these sort of things that people, it became a new jargon. That people say, oh yes, you don't just set yourself objectives, it's got to be a big, hairy, audacious goal. You always have the terms goals and objectives are often used interchangeably, as are targets. Some of the businesses we work with use different terminology. OKRs, that's another one where there was a book written all about OKRs, objectives, key result areas. And I'm interested, do you use objectives in your organization? Is that the go-to term, or are you using other terms? Do you think these are interchangeable or not? And I will give you a chance to have a response on this and let us know whether those are terms that you use. Should you be using those instead? Was it Jim Collins, Dawn, from what the Big Hairy Audacious Goals? Thank you. Well on there, Dawn. I feel like there's quite a few of these. I was going to go with Ken. Dawn, you use OKRs, and so would you say it is in terms of objectives? Is that something that you've gone through the whole OKR process and you cascade them, and the key result areas works for you to have a bigger objectives? Thank you. Everybody's answering my question. Where my brain, I hadn't put it in my notes. My brain went. We use objectives, says Rachel. You tend to use objectives. One of the things that when I've looked into this, how we use the terming, is that I think they do have all different terms. So and the Jim Collins book, which is built to last, which is very much about longer term goals. So that would make sense in terms of this big, hairy, audacious goal. And I think these terms be used to, they need to have different levels of focus, and they're not necessarily interchangeable in my way. Yeah, same, Emma. So we found it, I don't know whether it's just a bit Americanized. We said it can be something where people go, try and use OKRs, but are they any different from an objective and a milestone, for example? Um, and it is about maybe choosing the right terms or methodology for your own business. Are you an SME? Are you a large process or organization? I agree, Hazel. I think it is a difference whether it's activity based or results based. Um, and not wanting to go into metrics. So that's why you're thinking objectives, key results areas. So certainly the big hairy audacious goal, I think that's very much a visionary. You want it to be at least five years. Objectives is the classic, and that would be in much of the success literature. And I will move on when we're talking about this and use more objectives. In our software, we use objectives and milestones. So we have company and basically saying that you could have an objective, but you still need to break it down into deliverables. And one of the key things that I will talk to you about in terms of the be careful areas that I find when I'm working with businesses that sometimes they don't necessarily do well is that quite often objectives and process goals become interchangeable. So we'll try and differentiate between the two of those because I think that's helpful. But certainly an objective should be about setting direction and priority. And it's about that statement of intent. And then if you have a milestone or that could be a key result area, then that's a way in which you might break that down, in my opinion, to make sure that you can see if you are on track over the course of the year. I think the OKR's idea of it, it's usually about ambitious goals. It's about executing and making sure you're executing key results. And again, it does depend on what's relevant for that business. And sometimes a refresh of your terminology is really useful as well. Targets generally, I've found, then it's been something where it's often financial. If you're in sales, that's where people have often come up with the target terminology, and that's where we've used this. But I think where problems can arise is where the labels get mixed, but the intent is different. So whatever term you use is making sure that it's really clear to your audience what it is that you're using. So I'm certainly sensing from what people are talking about here that many people must be coming to this with an HR hat on, or certainly a senior management hat on. So getting that sort of thing. So you're saying, Dawn, you had your first year with OKRs, so it kind of worked at that high level, but getting the cascading to work out there. Head of department, I'm saying, is buy-in. Is that the challenge? And I think that's because people don't always understand it. And we'll look at other options that you can have there. I'm liking the look of that image, Steve, but I won't click on it now because I think I need to peer in on it. So whichever term we go for, let's assume we are talking about classic objectives, which may have milestones or they may have key result areas, but we're talking about something that is not going to just sit at the top of an organization. It's something that's going to be cascaded down in organization, and we're going to make sure that people know what's expected of them on a daily basis. Why are we going to look at that? Because, of course, purpose of objectives is to deliver high performance and motivation and engagement. Those of you, I'm sure many of you have done engagement surveys. The number one question on certainly the Gallup engagement survey is, I know what's expected of me, or I know what's expected at work. How do people know what's expected of themselves? Generally, it's objectives. We used to have job descriptions. That's less and less likely, but having specific clear performance objectives that are relevant to their role in that financial year is really key for keeping people focused. And to my mind, I think that in this day and age, as in compared to when I was in a large enterprise organization 15, 20 years ago, everything seems to move so quickly. So it's even more important to make sure that people have clarity on a quarterly basis, let's say, let alone an annual basis. But then if we come down to objectives in terms of the term, what I was thinking, why do they not always work? Why are we sometimes disappointed with the impact? Because actually there's lots of evidence that objectives should be really valuable. And I thought about a few issues that might be behind it. And if you think you've got other ones, you let me know that they are. And I created a poll here that you can select. You should be able to select more than one, but maybe don't select all of them. So in your experience, if objectives haven't worked, what do you think the problem was? Now, I realise I haven't got poor cascade, which is what Dawn might say. But what do you think the issues are in your experience when objectives haven't really worked? Move that over there. 70% participation. Okay, good. Right, let me share this with you. And again, if anyone wants to comment on their thing, or if you didn't feel that your issue or problem with objectives was covered, then please do feel free to comment. So what we've got here, the number one reason is that they're badly written or vague. I'm glad you put that, because hopefully there'll be some tips in here that you can share with people at the end of the webinar. The second two, which are neck and neck, is lack of clarity of company goals. Isn't that interesting? And lack of buy-in or ownership. And those actually, you could argue, are two of the same thing. One, well, that they're not the same thing, but they are influenced by each other. Lack of clarity of the company goals. It is surprising how often I've sat with boards, I've been doing facilitation, and there isn't a consistent view of what the company goals are. They may know what problems are. They may have one or two defined objectives at company level, but have they actually gone far enough to really crystallize those and then cascade them? So people don't always know where the business is trying to go. And if they don't know where the business is trying to go, I mean, again, someone here commented it hasn't cascaded. How is it going to cascade down the organization? And the risk of lack of clarity of what the purpose is that people have to make up clarity, which can mean your organization is all going in different directions. So you're not, channeling effort and an alignment. Lack of buy-in or ownership, that's interesting too, because if people don't understand why something's important, i.e. that it links to the company goal or strategy, the other thing that can cause that is that the line manager may have just imposed it on that person, or the person doesn't believe in it, or it's kind of lip service. It's not worth the paper it's written on. And that's the same thing with things like set once and forgotten, and to a certain extent manager capability. If the individual isn't engaged in that development of that objective, they are not going to be bought into it, and therefore it's not going to be as motivational as something that they really participated in. So all of those, you can see, could be issues that are more organic at an organizational level. But if you're here as an HR partner, it's very clear that if your company goals are not visible, then that's an issue. One thing I would say, however, and this is a lot when I'm working with businesses, when we get down to an individual level, the acronym SMART, that is really useful, making sure that it is really clear. But when you are at a high level company level, it isn't the end of the world if you haven't got a very specific measure in place. The main thing is that people understand the direction, a clear direction, and what their priorities are. So in my opinion, a company goal, what's important is the visibility, the ability for people to buy into it, the fact they can see it and they know how to prioritize and align their behaviors alongside it. Where you really want to get really specific and measurable is when you're going down at an individual level. So again, any thoughts on that, please feel free to chip in here. What makes objectives high quality? Well, having clarity. Laura's on this call. So Laura's somebody I work with over at business school, and one of the courses that I run with her is all about managing underperformance. And the reason for that is that the number one reason, in my experience, for people underperforming is that they don't have clarity. And actually, if you're having performance issues in an organization, routinely finding that people are seen as not performing, well, do they understand clearly what's expected of them? And this comes down to objective setting. And that is not just setting and giving someone an objective, it's that whole co-creation. So you want people to feel that they've co-created it. They know how to progress against that objective. It's something that's within their control, so they're motivated by it. It's relevant to that company outcome and to their actual job, their real work, time-bound and reviewable. So if I'd have said the SMART acronym, which I'm sure many of you have come across, there's where you see this SMART acronym. Now, whenever I run training on objective setting, I do come back to SMART, or we've got a little variation on it here called SMARTer. And I think it's really easy. People go, oh yes, I know what SMART stands for. But knowing what it stands for is different from understanding why it's actually more than an acronym in my view. And also it's different from being able to write a smart objective, which is really quite an art. So we'll look at that in due course. But what I wanted to explain here, so my background in psychology, and one of the things I remember when I was looking at the goal setting research, where it all came from in the 60s, Locke and Latham, I think the original protagonists of what they looked at in terms of goal setting. And it is definitely one of the areas of management research which consistently shown to, if you set clear goals and couple it with regular feedback, so constructive feedback, that is the most consistently demonstrated way of delivering high performance out there, and it still hasn't been superseded. So it's the basics. It may be boring, but actually clear objective setting with regular review is what drives high performance. The problem is sometimes we don't do it very well enough, and we don't necessarily train our managers to do it. And I think it's really helpful if you understand why SMART is useful. Well, first of all, specific. If you know clearly, specifically what you're trying to achieve, then well, that's helpful in itself. But I mean, have you ever been in a position, I've certainly had it, where you've inherited somebody who is working for another line manager, and you inherit therefore their appraisal and the objectives that they had. Now, if something is specific, you should be able to, even if you are not that subject matter expert, assess whether or not that objective has been achieved with a bit of support. But if it's very vaguely written and it's kind of all in someone's head and it's non-specific, then that's really difficult for you to be objective about it. So specific is really key for clarity. And I've got some examples later where we can look at it. But the other bit about specific, the other S is stretching. So you'll notice on this slide, I've got stretching and achievable. So this is where it comes down to, if you want to have someone motivated, they want to think that the objective is worth doing. If it's too easy, i.e. no stretch at all, then it doesn't really get people out of bed in the morning. Conversely, if it's too difficult, if it's impossible, if they don't think they're ever going to get there, it doesn't get them out of bed in the morning. It makes them stay in bed. And that's where the achievable/agreed is so useful, because it illustrates that what you really need to do is have a conversation. You want the line manager and the individual to talk about where's the business going, and let's work together, let's collaborate on what meaningful goals would look like. And there isn't enough of that goes on, honestly. It's the skills of that line manager to be able to work with the individual, to coach them, to help them formulate something that fits into this. The measure and time bound goes without saying. How can you review something if you haven't got a timeline? Measures can be really useful to motivate people to overachieve or to quantify the level of objective. And then this whole piece about engage, it says engage, probably should say engaging and reviewable. So this concept, it's not something that's done once. It should be something that we can review on an ongoing basis, because that is how we really genuinely get high performance. So that's one of the things that I just think, because goal setting actually links to motivation, is why the SMART acronym is quite relevant. Now, has any of you on here, other than Steve, used the Balanced Scorecard? Do any of you use the Balanced Scorecard in your organisations? Not you, Pedro. Have you come across it, Pedro? Have you heard of it before? So I'll just keep an eye on the chat. You do, a few of you, most of you not. So the Balanced Scorecard was something that was introduced in the organisation that I was working in, and it was quite effective. We used it with our objectives to categorise them. There's other ways of doing things, but it definitely played a part in giving structure. But what I'm going to do is I'll explain why that is the case and just introduce it to you. So again, it's one of these tools that was developed by Kaplan and Norton in the 90s. And what they discovered was that very often with our objectives, particularly financial objectives, if you've got a financial number, or if a business is judging its success by purely a financial number, then the financial number is basically what you call a lagging indicator. And a lagging indicator is something that you're looking back on. Thanks, Steve. Yes, so Steve was in the same business we worked in. A lagging indicator is looking at what the balance sheet did last year. So it's very much looking at what you've done in the past. And of course, objectives are trying to drive performance in the future. So what they did was they said we should not just be measuring our numerics, we should be trying to look at those leading indicators, which are going to help us successful next year. And balance means let's try and make sure we've got objectives that fit into all of those areas. So they also looked at customer, processes, learning and growth. Now, in a moment, I'll show you how those fit together, but let me give you some examples of what those might be if you were setting across these sorts of things. So obviously finance, I think most people here are going to understand what a financial goal would be. So as I say, we were using these as categories. So it would be, order intake, EBITDA, profitability, etc. Customer, now customer can be external customer or it can be internal customer. So it's thinking about what are we offering? So you might think about customer if you are externally facing, net promoter scores. So that would be something you could track, market share, breadth or reach of offering. If you are internal, let's say if you're in HR or L&D, you could look at uptake of learning and development courses, satisfaction, engagement scores. Those would fit in there. Then we've got process, because of course process is how you manage to achieve excellence repeatedly. It might be how can we measure our processes? How can we speed up our processes? What are the processes that we have out there and how can we improve them? Because that's how you make yourself more productive, more efficient as an organisation. And then finally, learning and growth. Sometimes that's called organisational capability. So that's focusing on the people aspects of that. And notice it's really interesting, it's really common. Many of us on here would be in HR type roles. You think that only what we do fits in learning and growth, but it isn't the case. Actually, every department, if you think about it, can have objectives that sit into each of those quadrants. It's just learning how to think about it. And the reason that's important is because Kaplan and Norton said that these all flowed into each other. And I particularly like this. And again, hats off to everybody here that's on here. You're investing in your own personal learning and growth. And they said that actually success all starts with having that sense of learning and growing as an organisation, your organisational capability. So if we haven't got the right skills, if we're not learning new skills as an organisation, if the resources that we have, which fits in this learning and growth organisational capability cluster, if we haven't got the right resource, we're not going to be able to refine our processes or improve our processes or deliver against our processes. If we don't have good processes, we are limited in how well we can serve our internal and external customers, which of course means we're going to have lower financial results. Now, rhetorical question here, but how many times in an organisation, if you've gone and said, can I have some money to invest in training or developing people or time even, they might go, no, 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 because that customer here is going to take priority, or no, we can't afford it. And if you think about this, that's actually topsy-turvy thinking, or it's lack of investment. So I felt that that's a really useful thing, particularly if you're in an L&D type involvement. It's all about investment, isn't it, in terms of how you are able to develop better processes, better customer services and better financial results. But it is investment, and we're in an environment where everyone wants everything right now. And it is quite a tricky thing to have that longer term mentality as to how we're going to build on it. And of course, moving on from that, if you're going to have these structures in place, having those relevant objectives need to be regularly reviewed. So I will come back to that balanced scorecard aspect. Yes, and Grace said I have done podcasts on it where it goes in more detail. I've got a previous webinar as well that I've done if you want to look at it in more detail. What I want to do now is skip back to a concept of SMART. And this is going to feel, because you're HR people in here, I'll skip through some of it, but it's the sort of thing that I might do if I was training people in terms of SMART. So I've got here some less than SMART objectives, all right? But what I want to use this bit to do is to highlight some of the challenges that I find when I work with clients. And actually, well, we have performance management software. I've done software, I've done analysis of the objectives that are in there. And believe me, a lot of what I'm sharing here, you genuinely see. And of course, if you're doing something like performance related pay, any of these would be really quite difficult to measure against, or I wouldn't want to be assessing performance against them with this sort of objective. So the first one, by mid-October, I'll double my client meetings. So what's the problem with that? I'll answer it for you, but I'll give you a chance if you want to tell me about what you don't like about the second one. So the second one I'm going to analyze in a little bit more detail. So mid-October, vague, right? When's mid-October? Double. Double from what to what? How many are you doing currently? From 1 to 2? In which case, is that really stretching or otherwise? What kind of clients? Who are you seeing? And what's the purpose? It's very much a process. So really, that's not really taking us anywhere. Now, when I go through this with a group of managers, these next two, quite often people will tell me that these are smart. And I can see why they say that. But one of the things I think always is smart is you can always make an objective smarter. And so I'm interested in what you might critique if you were working on the second one or maybe the third one. So I will reduce our stock levels by 20% over the next 6 months. I can achieve this because the analysis done last month shows this possibility. Any comments on that one? Feel free to comment or observe as to, are you scratching your head? What I often find with this one, people go, what's the analysis got to do with anything? Yes, exactly, Hazel. Lots of words don't make smart. How will this be achieved? And also, what is the actual outcome? That's also it. So, and why? There's lots of questions that drop out of that one. It's a bit head scratchy, but I find because it's got 2 numbers in it, and it's the same with the other one, I'll increase my sales by £1,000 a month by a date or before. I'll increase my sales cost by 10% because it's got metrics in it. People kind of say, do you know what, that's smart, but actually it doesn't. So exactly as Hazel says, metrics or lots of words don't make something smart. Would you know how to measure it? Probably not. So if I stick with the stock levels one, let's also explore this further because this starts to highlight some of the issues that you sometimes see. So first of all, it isn't being specific about what kind of stock, and I'll come back to that point in a moment. It does have a measure. The person thinks it's achievable, but the problem is we don't really know whether it's going to help or hinder business strategy. And there's no real timeline either, to be honest. It's like over the next 6 months. Well, by when? What does over mean? Every month or by a deadline? So it's terms like over, that's not what you want. So just saying how, it doesn't say how they're going to do it. What will they do differently? Absolutely. The other thing about something like this, I thought it's worth highlighting is that you do not necessarily know what the purpose of this is. How is this relevant to the business? And I kind of think about it in relation to if I was in a quick fit tires place, if I was in a place where people drive in and they want you to replace their tire regularly, immediately because they've got a flat tire, any sort of car spares type place. If we just thought, well, do you know what? We want to save space in the warehouse, so we've got rid of our most popular tyre stock, or we've really reduced our stock down, that could actually result in a reduction in sales, couldn't it? All right. So it's kind of thinking, what's the purpose of this? Is this about saving money and stopping, maybe not having the very unusually called in parts that are really highly expensive? Or is it about space? What's the purpose of something like that? And that's a very simplistic example, but sometimes in objectives, you can find if we don't know why, and this links back to our whole thing about understanding and cascading corporate objectives, is then you can unintentionally generate the wrong behaviours or even conflicting behaviours. So making sure that somebody understands why something's important is key in that respect. So now I'm going to do one that I will get you to comment on. Let's explore this because this is getting into the realm of another area that I often see people maybe not writing objectives in the way that I would recommend. They're not as clear as they could be. So this says, continue to assist call centre staff to understand customer issues. Now, I'm imagining that none of you think that that is smart because there isn't a date, is there? There's not a measure. What do you think of this? What is this objective trying to achieve? I know that people are doing things in the background and sometimes it takes a while for the chat to come through to catch up. Absolutely. You want people to upskill, to improve the skills in there. And if they upskill, presumably the purpose of that is to improve customer service, So if we were thinking absolutely customer experience, Emma, so if we were thinking in our balanced scorecard, this would probably maybe even net promoter score. Let's say at the top we want to improve our net promoter score. These might have been the thing. This might be something that is one of the tools that we use to do it, but it's not smart. And it's useful to think about what are the problems with it, because that's what sometimes happens. So the individual, whoever this is, if you continue to help someone, they don't own it. This is really common. The second point is probably one of the biggest issues I find. It's not actually an objective, i.e. an outcome. It's more of a process goal or milestone, and it isn't really very specific at that. So we don't even know what the person's going to do. What does assist mean? Continue to assist. And there's no specifics about what those issues are. So it's really a fluff, right? It's not really clear what it is. So if we were to flip something like this and think, well, what is it that they really want to improve? What might be a better objective that is going to, as you say, upskill Chloe or achieve a better customer experience? It's clearly about the call centre. So what sort of thing might we be looking for? So would it be fair to say that this might be closer to the objective that we're looking at here? So, and feel free to critique this, right? Because, especially it could say March 2026, I'm in the wrong year, but increase first call customer issue resolution from 65% to 75% by the 31st of March 2025. Would you be happy to say that that is smarter and it's probably going in the right direction? And the things that are better of it, thank you, Claudine. Good, I'm glad you said that. I mean, you can always improve them, I'm sure. So you might say maybe what the issues are, but it's better. But what we've got is also, we're saying the percentage from and to. Presumably we have a measure in our call centre about what first call fix is or resolution. We must have those definitions somewhere in the background, and you've got a date. So it's better. It's better. And it's much clearer, and it would be an outcome, because if you therefore achieved 75% first call customer issue resolution by that date, in principle, that's met that objective. And then if we were trying to chunk that up further, this could well be about that sort of objective. Might be, these are all at different levels, aren't they? Because if you think about someone in a role, right at the top of the organisation, they're going to have a bigger objective that's going to cascade down. So this particular one could sit with the team leader in the call centre. Good point, Hazel, exactly. So if it was aligning with the company objectives, we would imagine that that's maybe one of the hows of the high level ones. So if we went back to knowing as a company what we're expecting, we're trying to do, and we're using the balanced scorecard, so it's in the customer, you don't have to actually, but we got a net promoter score of 8.5. That's what we want to achieve at a company level. That's a what. And then how we might do it is the what and the what and the why. Sorry, the why. This is then the what and the why. So then we could cascade down. We had the objective on the previous screen, and then if you are lower down in the call agent area, then you might have objectives which are around answer 95% of your calls within 5 rings. Now we are getting here into almost KPIs, which I didn't mention here on the top one, but all of these, it's showing how they all kind of formulate together. So I might want to say I'm going to conduct customer engagement reviews with 80% of my base, 10 focus groups with different customer demographics. Again, those all could be smarter, but those are examples of the hows, but the hows still need to be an outcome. So let's say I've got our company objective at the top. We know why we want to do it. Then at different levels in the organisation, we've got these other outcome-based objectives that are all measurable, but bring them all together as a pyramid. They should be progressing the business to get close to that 8.5 promoter score. So what therefore is the problem that I'm saying that I find with a lot of objectives? A lot of objectives, if I interrogate a database of objectives, start with these terms. And there are many, many other examples. So we had on our previous one was assist, but I often have things like improve or continue or enhance. And you did see on the previous slide, I don't think it was improved, but it was basically, it kind of got there, but the difference was it improved something from 65% to 75%. So it was specific about the start and finish. What's the problem with words like this in objectives? So what I would say is it is passive, yes, and they are generally about the process as opposed to the outcome. So the biggest single thing that I was trying to encourage people when I go through a training course is that there's something like this might be how you get the job done. It might be a subset, it might be a milestone, but what we often find is that objectives are written like processes as opposed to outcomes. And if they're not written very clearly as an outcome, then it's much, much harder to evaluate it, for people to know clearly what they're going to do. And it becomes more about what and how they're doing as opposed to what and how they achieve something, and being very clear about their end point. So trying to encourage line managers in your organizations not to have those, that make the actual objective is very clear as an outcome. By all means, use milestones to add other aspects into it, but that's the key thing that you'll find once you know you can't stop seeing it. I guarantee you'll find quite a lot of that in the objectives that you see out there. So just concluding this here, common issues with SMART is try to avoid process goals, really try and encourage line managers, and at the top as much as possible, agreeing outcomes. Make sure that is at the right level for that personal role. So on that call center example, we looked at a number of them, whether it's the net promoter score, whether it's the level for the call center team leader, or whether it's the person who's answering the phones. So the objective needs to be at the right level for them, but it also needs to be an outcome. It still needs to be measurable and an outcome. Obviously, make sure if you're using a measure that it's actually achievable, that it's something that people are motivated by, and just make sure that they are fully agreed and understood, which actually correlates with what you said at the start in terms of the issues with objectives. In summary, when it comes down to objectives, clarity beats complexity, and avoiding confusion, having clarity is key to performance as well. So keeping it simple, and I think what was Dawn's word earlier on in terms of lots of words doesn't make a smart objective. Conversation is so important because that gets buy-in. So teaching our line managers to coach people to come up with their objectives, and then coach it to be an outcome. So they need to recognize when something's a process goal and make it an outcome. And then adjusting it, adapting something. As you go through a business year, it's really useful that it's not just done once, that you might review an objective and go, actually, that isn't as clear as I thought it was. Now this has come to life. So why don't we tweak this? Or something can change over the course of the year where part of an objective becomes irrelevant or unachievable. So that we should tweak them to keep them relevant, to keep people motivated. And if you come across an objective and you don't fully understand it, or you need to sign off on it, I would definitely say don't agree or sign off on an objective you don't fully understand, because you may well find that they don't understand what it is either. And you can add the odd questions around, well, how would I know if you've achieved that? Or what would I see, which would mean that we know that this has been achieved or overachieved or underachieved. So, it's so interesting because everybody knows SMART, and it's almost an eye-rolling thing to raise. It's so easy. Everyone knows the acronym, but actually it is complete art to write a SMART objective and really have that true clarity. And so I highly recommend that you challenge the people that you work with to work more on that, to do more. If anyone's Grace has dropped a few useful links in, and we'll send those out to you. So we've got lots of resources on this sort of thing. If you wanted to know more on this, if you wanted to know more about how you could use the Balanced Scorecard for different areas, I've got certainly a webinar until which talks about, if you're in HR, this is an example of what a Balanced Scorecard might look like. If you're in operations, this is what it might look like. So we've got other things there if you were looking to use it more. And all of the links and recordings, you've got a QR code that you can grab if any of those. Oh, that's the QR code, sorry, for the next webinar. We'll send you a link to that as well. Other resources are out there. And actually the podcast that we were referring to, I did quite a long time ago, but we'll send you the link about that. So thank you so much for joining. Do join me for the next webinar, which we're looking about learning, focusing in on learning. That's because we've actually started developing a lot of learning management and working a lot with learning management now with our platform there. But also I'm doing much more consultancy now. So I've got a fantastic team behind me. So if there's anyone in your area who's looking for some support with training or consultancy or facilitation, I am absolutely available for that. And you can check, you can book in with me if you wish. My Calendly has just appeared in the chat. So I'm really enjoying getting out more and working with people. And it's only through the kind of working with people like this that I go, oh my goodness, that's what objectives look like in a real organisation. And that's why we should definitely keep educating people. It's still something we find challenging. So please, if anyone wants to stay on or if anyone's got any other questions, feel free to raise those. I'm going to stop sharing now, and thank you very much for joining.